Hello everyone, I'm Jim Staley, and we are looking at a journey through the Bible. We are in lesson 7, and this lesson starts a new age. We spent the first 6 lessons looking at the patriarchal age. Went from very beginning there, Genesis 1:1 with creation, and we went all the way through until the time that Moses delivers the people of Israel from the Egyptian bondage. We left them at the Red Sea, and you know that during that study, some of the things that we learned is how man drifted away from God. It started there with Adam and Eve working at or in the garden, and Satan came along and deceived them. He changed one word in what God had said. God had said, if you eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you will surely die. Satan added the word not. You will surely not die. And then he gave him a reason that he would end up wanting to go ahead and believe that it was, you would surely not die. And that was that God knew that if you ate of that fruit of the tree, you would be as smart, as wise as him. And who doesn't want to be smart? Who doesn't want to be wise? As your kids grow on up, and as I was growing up, I always thought I'd love to be as wise as my dad. Matter of fact, when you get into the teenage years, sometimes you think you're smarter than your mom and dad. We all know how that goes. But when we realize, when life settles in, we get a better respect for our parents. And it's about the same way with God. We start out thinking, oh, we don't need God. As we go through life, you find out there are times that God is the one thing that will end up pulling you through. And in the patriarchal age, God spoke directly to the heads of the house. He spoke right to Adam, and then he spoke right to Isaac. He spoke right to Jacob. He spoke directly to Joseph. Joseph got in trouble because God gave him a dream. He had dreamed that his brothers were going to bow down to worship him. And they got jealous, sold him into slavery, goes down to Egypt. Well, then they get into a famine, and they're starving. And what happens? They go down to Egypt, because Egypt at that time was known to have food. Why did they have food? Well, Joseph had seen that there was going to be a 7-year famine. And he had 7 years of very good years for produce. And Joseph, when he told the Pharaoh put him in charge, and he stored all up the grain. And that way, when everybody else was in famine, Egypt had the food. And so Jacob and Joseph's brothers came down to Egypt. And Joseph was in charge of the food in Egypt. And they fulfilled the dream that God had given Joseph. And that's how God protects us and works with us. He knows what's going on. He knows a lot more than we do. And so he ended up having Joseph go down to Egypt. He saved the Israelites. He saved Jacob. He saved the people of promise there in Egypt. But after Joseph died, there was pharaohs that didn't know about Joseph. And then they got worried that the Israelites were going to overpower the Egyptians. So they put them into bondage. They made them their slaves. They did things to try and control them. One of the last things that they did to try and control them was they had all male children were to be put to death. Well, that's where Moses was put in the Nile River in a basket by his mom, because she didn't want him to die at the hands of the Egyptian soldiers that were coming around and doing these things. And lo and behold, Pharaoh's daughter sees the basket and raises Moses as her own. Of course, the first few years, since she was not one who had bore the child, and they needed someone to nurse the child, had Miriam, who happened to be a Hebrew slave woman of the house, find a woman to take and raise Moses until he was weaned, able to be on his own. And so lo and behold, Miriam took him back to Moses' mother. And that's where Moses learned about the Hebrew people. And in the wilderness, once he tried to defend the Hebrew people and ended up killing an Egyptian taskmaster in order to protect the Hebrew people, he had to run. He spent 40 years in the wilderness. And in that wilderness is where God talked to him through a burning bush that never burned up. That's what kind of amazed Moses, was to see this bush that was on fire, but fire wasn't spreading, yet the bush wasn't consumed. It was still there. And so that's when God told Moses he was to go back and free the Israelites. I'm going to share a screen here now, and we're going to see that this is where we're going to pick up, because the purpose of this lesson is to show how God's pattern for worship under the law of Moses, the Old Testament, differs from his plan for our worship today, to relate some accounts of unbelief and to show how unbelief led to suffering. We will then look at the birth of Jesus and how he lived under the law of Moses until the time he fulfilled it and brought us to the age of grace. So this will cover quite a long period of time, but feel free to ask questions and make comments whenever possible. We desire to get answers back to you as soon as possible. If you wonder how it is that you could make these comments and questions, if you're viewing this on either Facebook or on YouTube, you can enter those in the comments sections. I do look at the comments sections whenever I can. I will try and get them back to you as soon as possible. And so, again, feel free to ask those questions. And now, if I can find out where I am at, we can find out that here is going to be another quick review of where we started and where we're going. We started out with the very beginning and established that there really is a God. That's the first thing that you basically need to establish when you're looking at the Bible. What good is it to look at the Bible if it's just a good story? Is there a God? And then you can start looking for the evidences to see whether or not is the Bible really the Word of God. If there is a God, if we can accept that there is a creator with intelligence, that we're not just something that happened in outer space. Where did the Big Bang come from? We discussed that in the very first lesson there on the introduction. Both take faith, because neither one, the Big Bang nor God's creation where he spoke, neither one of those things can be reproduced by us. And that's one of the things with science, to have something that needs to be reproducible, have to be able to do it again. The intelligence design is more reasonable than evolution. To think that we were just a product of a blender just doesn't make much more sense, because there's intelligence that we have, and that gives us an indication that there had to be some kind of intelligence in our design. From that day of creation, we traveled through the history of man from the garden all the way to the deliverance from the Egyptian bondage. God spoke directly to those who sought him. Noah obeyed God, even though it took 120 years for what God said would happen until the floods came. That's what he built this ark. Building an ark. Did it for 120 years. Built that ark before the floods came. That takes a lot of faith to know that, yeah, not this year, but maybe next year, maybe the next year, and to do it 120 years. It's a long time. God guided Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and Moses so to protect and fulfill his promise to his chosen people. He made that promise to Abraham that he would bless them, and that his offspring would be a blessing to all the people of the world, and also that his offspring would be more numerous than the stars in the sky or the sands in the sea. Something that was quite ironic, since at 99 he didn't have any children by Sarah. And so all of a sudden I think, yeah, your family is going to be bigger than the sands of the sea. So we pick up the story of the Israelites as they crossed the Red Sea. This is starting with Exodus chapter 14. As they journeyed through the wilderness of the Sinai desert towards Canaan, the promised land, and through the kingdoms and the exile all the way to the life of Christ, they bring lessons to us by what they experienced and what God had in store for all mankind. So with the Mosaic Age, a new age, where all of a sudden God is going to be speaking to the group of people instead of the heads of each family. He is going to speak to the Israelites through a priesthood, the Mosaic priesthood. Aaron came first, chief priest, and Moses was there as the leader. But Aaron was the one who had the priesthood, the Levitical priesthood. Now the final plague had killed all the firstborn of the Egyptians. Pharaoh was so distraught that he made the request that the Israelites go. It's in Exodus 12:33. It says the Egyptians were urgent with the people to send them out of the land in haste. For they said, we shall all be dead. So God led them out of Egypt as a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. When the Egyptians pursued them, the water came over them, and they drowned in the sea. In Exodus 14:30-31, the Bible says, thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Israel saw the great power that the Lord used against the Egyptians, so the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. Israel was delivered from slavery and is symbolic of how he saves his people from sin today. What are some of the things that we talked about? What happened with Noah? How is it that he saved 8 people and yet cleansed the world of sin? It was in the flood through water. How is it that, again, he's so consistent in what he says and what he delivers? How is it that he saved Israel and crossed the Red Sea so they passed through the water safely to the other side? And what happened with the enemies? When the Egyptians went on in, it's just like they say, they saw that the Egyptians were dead on the seashore. The water came in and drowned all those soldiers, all the Egyptians' army that was pursuing them, drowned, because they thought they could go through the sea just like the Israelites. Well, they didn't have God on their side. Israelites did. Moses did. So, do you want to be delivered from the slavery of sin? We'll go on through and we'll look at other examples in here, seeing just how it is that God has a consistent plan, something that has been since the very beginning. We see it in Noah, and now we see it here as the Egyptians tried to pursue the Israelites. So they've crossed over into the wilderness. They've gone from Egypt into the Sinai Peninsula, and wandering in the desert does not go without problems. Food and water are a must. We know that. We know that we need food. We know we need water. God soon started feeding them with the manna. It was the bread they had to gather each day, and a double portion on the 6th day, Friday, so that they could observe the Sabbath rest. They weren't supposed to work. That was the one thing, and Moses will end up delivering them once he comes down out of the mountain. But they would be able to gather this manna, and God also provided quail for food when the Israelites complained about only having bread to eat. Even though they rebelled at times, God continued to care for them while teaching them to rely on him daily. Now, that manna, it's an amazing story that I heard, and if you look at the account of just what manna is, it's almost like they got to live on sweet rolls. Man, I mean, they were sweet as honey. And so, I mean, yeah, I have a problem with donuts. It goes around my waist most of the time, and I love a good donut. But I could see that maybe day in, day out, maybe it would get a little bit to where you start getting old and and you think, man, wouldn't it be nice to have something else? Because why? Well, you just don't realize how good the good stuff is if you've had it too much. But God then provided quail for meat, so that they were able to get the quail. The quail would just come on in. They didn't have to do much in the way of hunting it that God provided for them. They had meat, they had bread. Figure out there's various ways that you could fix the meat. That's what we have today. And these things, God provided them. Matter of fact, God also provided water for them. There was even a time that God caused water to flow from a rock to care for their needs. He also turned a spring of bitter water into sweet water so they could quench their thirst. These are stories that if you read through the Exodus there, you'll see them, how these things happen. You'll also see and read about how Moses at that rock, when he struck the rock to get him water, he made one rash error that prohibited him from going into the promised land, and that was that he struck the rock. And instead of giving God the credit for the water coming out, he took Moses and brother Aaron, said, "Must we draw you water from the rock?" It wasn't them. And that's the one thing we always have to remember in our lives. God takes care of us. If we sit there and think that, oh, how great we are, God's so much greater. God has our lives in his hands. And it's only through his blessings that we have the ability to have life each day. It's only him that allows us to continue to have our families, our friends, our jobs, our food, our health. All these things are gifts from God, not something we earn. They're a gift. And how many things would it take for you to have faith in God? Here the Israelites, gone through the water. I mean, they'd been slaves for 150 years. Managed to all of a sudden have this guy come down, perform a few miracles, and convince the Egyptians that especially after the death of the first one, let them go. They start going, and then all of a sudden they're pursued. You come to a large body of water. I mean, the Red Sea is a shipping lane today. And you talk about having it part. If you figure that it would be deep enough to hold some of these super tankers, that's a lot of water. And it is a narrower section of waterway, but it is deep. And they were able to go through on dry land. And then the Egyptians, that army that chased after them, the water came in and totally wiped them out. That's one great thing. Then all of a sudden, here you are in the desert. You need water. You need food. Well, they were given food from heaven, water to drink in the middle of the desert. Yet they still lacked faith because they'll still end up complaining about the food. Sure, when it first happened, yeah, they saw what happened and they praised God for delivering them from the Egyptians because the Egyptians were dead on the seashore. They saw that for sure. So that they feared God. Whoa, that's a wake-up call. Then they get out in the desert and they think, we're in a desert. We're going to die out here now. Well, God brought them food, water, man. Still had reasons that they wanted to complain. And so, journey far enough to where they get to Mount Sinai. And this here is where the big event happens, a rare nature event, that of receiving the Ten Commandments. Their journey led them to Mount Sinai. Here, 40 years ago, Moses had fled after killing the Egyptian taskmaster, and is where he saw the burning bush, where God told him to go back to Egypt and ask Pharaoh to let the Israelites go. This time, Moses is called by God to ascend to the peak and stand in the very presence of God. Stand in his presence. So he's familiar with this mountain, and he'd gone up partway to see that burning bush. But now he's going up to the very top of the mountain. He goes on up there. Among the thunder and lightning, Moses received the Ten Commandments written by God on 2 tablets of stone. He was on the mount for 40 days. 40 days is quite a bit of time. But ironically, while Moses was on the mountain receiving the law, the people had Aaron make them a golden calf statue, and they worshiped. that as having freed them from slavery. Now you would think, after going through and seeing the Red Sea and seeing all the Egyptian army drowned, that it wouldn't take just, you'd think that last 40 days that you'd be able to say that they'd have faith. But within that 40-day period of time, they decided to melt down all the gold, make it into a golden calf, and worship the calf and say it was the calf, the golden calf, that brought them out of bondage. So, a brief summary of the Ten Commandments. If you look in there in Exodus, you can find there definitely. This here is a shortened version of it, but you will have no other gods before me. Golden calf, shot that one down right there. Do not make any carved image. Well, they're 2 for 2 on violating that. Do not take my name in vain. Keep the Sabbath. Honor your father and mother. Do not murder. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. Do not bear false witness. And do not covet. Those were the 10 commandments that were written on that tablet of stone and brought down by Moses. But when Moses returned, what did he find? There in Exodus 32, 17 through 19. He's coming down the mountain, and so Joshua was one of the people that was there. And Moses came down and says, when Joshua heard the noise of the people as they shouted, he said to Moses, there is a noise of war in the camp. But he said, that's Moses, it is not the sound of shouting for victory or the sound of the cry of defeat, but the sound of singing that I heard. And as soon as he came near the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, Moses' anger burned hot. He threw the tablets out of his hand and broke them at the foot of the mountain. Definitely an upsetting scene. One that Moses, after having led them through and then leaving them in charge of Aaron, and Aaron, what does Aaron do? He gives in to them to build that golden calf. Well, then he took that calf, Moses did, he took the calf that they had made and burned it in fire and ground it to a powder and scattered it on the water and made the people of Israel drink it. Those that had faith were going to survive. Those that had made the calf, wanted to worship the calf, didn't have faith in God, it cost them their lives. Then Moses turned and went down from the mountain with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hand. Tablets that were written on both sides, on the front and on the back. They were written. Tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablet. Moses had gone back up. Once he does that and has the calf burned, makes them drink of the water, gets those that lacked faith out of the camp. Moses then returns back up on the mountain, and then we can see there that he ends up getting a second set of tablets written by the hand of God, another 40 days. And he brings it back on down the mountain. This time, on the second time he comes down the mountain, everything is fine, but he returned to the mountain for another 40 days and again received 2 tablets of stone with the commands of God on them. He also had given specific instruction for a tabernacle and directions in worship. All things were to be done according to the pattern given to Moses on the mountain. Yes, God also had given specific instructions for a tabernacle. Moses got the stones, and now he's got instructions for this tabernacle. When Moses delivered the word of God to people when he had descended from the mountain, his face glowed so bright that the people had to have him put a veil over his face just so they could look at him. That's amazing. You think now, okay, this is where you had to have a veil over his face so that they could look at him. Today, with our current situation, it seems like we're always looking at people with masks, almost like a veil over our mouths. But we need to speak forth the word of God, and it is beautiful. It's brilliant, brilliant work that God has given us through the Bible. But in Moses, when he came down from the mountain, his face glowed so bright so that they gave him that veil. In First Deuteronomy, in Deuteronomy 18, 17 through 19, it tells us that Moses told them of another prophet that would come, and that in verse 19 says, whoever will not listen to the words he shall speak in my name, I myself will require it of him. That man is Jesus. Yes, there's no words there. Again, Jesus wasn't new to them. This coming Messiah is something that the people were looking for. They were even looking and saying that he would be one like Moses. Moses delivered them from their bondage. Christ delivers us from the bondage of sin. We're going to look at the tabernacle and all its articles of worship. They're paid for by free will donations. Didn't have to. They didn't sit there and say, oh, where's the 10%? Where's the 12%? It was, we're building this for God. This is God's directions, and it was all paid for by free will donations. They had so much donated that they had to give some back. Even today, God's work is carried on by free will donations. You read that in 2 Corinthians 9:7. God does not want us to give out of compulsion. God loves a cheerful giver. He loves someone. He just doesn't mandate any percentage, doesn't tell us we have to give. We should be grateful to give, because look at all he gives us. And that's the point, is that God blesses us. There's some that are blessed more than others. That means there's some that could give more than others. Some just give praise to God. After all, we're children of God. God doesn't expect us to give more than we have to. He expects us to give what we want to. And that's been a pattern ever since the beginning. So their worship and the first of 4 pieces of furniture used in that worship is what we're going to look at. Because the pattern Moses was given for the tabernacle had 4 pieces of furniture in the tabernacle, where the priests carried out their duties. The first was the altar of incense in the most holy place. We know today that our prayers are as incense to God. This is Revelation 5:8. We will see the Old Testament pattern for worship was only a shadow of what was to come when Christ went to the cross on our behalf. That's actually stated in Hebrews 8:5. So, all that they did in the Old Testament, it was just a shadow of what was to come. Because, Moses speaking them the word of God, having seen God, had to put a veil over his face. We'll find out that through Christ, that veil is removed, and we can see God without being blinded, without being surprised. We can definitely be in awe of what it is that our God does for us each day, word and drop. God's directions are specific and are to be followed. Doing things God's way honors him. Doing things any other way only dishonors him. That is what Nadab and Abihu did when they offered unauthorized fire there in Leviticus 10:1 before the Lord, and it cost them their lives. Today, when we worship God the way we want, rather than the way God has directed us to, will cost us our spiritual life. God is specific. God told Moses the pattern that they would make the tabernacle in. He had to follow it. Noah was told how to build the ark. Width, length, height, floors, how it's to be divided up, how it's to be patched together. That's what saved him. Saved him through the flood there of Noah. Moses with the tabernacle. You want to worship God? You want to please God? You follow what he has to say. It's not so much about, how good I did that I should be able to just offer God what I want. He's got a purpose and a plan for us. And he knows that there is what it is that we should do. And we're going to pick up then by taking a look at these pieces of furniture, because we looked at that altar of incense, which are our prayers, and there's other pieces of furniture there in the most holy place that we're going to take a look at next time. This is where we'll pick up at. And so I thank you for tuning in for Lesson 7. Hopefully we'll see you in Lesson 8 as we pick up with the directions that Moses has given us, given Moses for building the tabernacle, and we'll see how it affects us in our worship of God today. So, thank you.